Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, we know this about tomorrow's election. We will be electing a new governor and lieutenant governor, and Jefferson Parish will select a new parish president. We'll look tonight at some key contests up and down the ballot, as well as major issues including higher education, the budget, and health care. And we will ponder why turnout is expected to be low. Turning out for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com. Julia O'Donoghue, reporter who covers state government for NOLA.com, the Times Picayune. And Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go to Errol first because time is just about out. Tomorrow's the day voters go to the polls, but how many of them are going to go?
Well, Jeremy's a numbers guy, and so I'm going to defer to him on that, okay? But I just want a little theory here. A lot of the people moan about low turnout, but sometimes high turnout's not necessarily a good thing, because sometimes when you have a high turnout, it's because people are afraid of something. There's something on the ballot that scares them. Classic example was the Duke Edwards race, where people had a real concern. And that drew a higher crowd. I'm not saying I don't think that was a healthy thing for Louisiana politics necessary. Or sometimes maybe there's this one issue, like suppose in this race we had 4 candidates, and there were 2 candidates who were strongly in favor of strict gun control legislation and 2 who were strongly opposed, and the whole governor's race was being elected on that. I mean, that's not a good thing either, to have a race centered around one big emotional issue. And so sometimes, if a race is a little bit boring, what happens is that the candidates all sort of gravitate in the direction. They all have their polls, they all have their advisors, they all know pretty much what the voters want to hear, and they all move in that direction. And so because of that, some voters don't see a real big difference between the candidates, and a lot of times they stay away. And so the extreme isn't necessarily good either, because it shows the voter apathy just because it's disinterested. But the fact that it's not a high turnout, it doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, but it's just the way politics works sometimes. But Jeremy, you got some numbers, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, the vote was down from what it was in November of last year. And I think everyone was watching the early voting period. Everyone was watching to see what the African American turnout would be like, and to see how women are going to vote, because obviously there's a significant gender gap in David Vitter's vote. David Vitter has a woman problem in his numbers, and the African American vote is off by 25% compared to November early voting last year. And women are down 10% in voting last year. Tom Shedler saying between 45 and 50, somewhere in between that range. Meanwhile, you have other folks that are saying that it could go lower, as low as maybe 42. You have pollsters who are predicting African-American turnout somewhere between, believe it or not, 22 on the extreme low end, up to around 26 or 27. I agree that those are definitely some of the problems, but I think one of them, too, is that I think voters, to an extent, are burned out on Louisiana politics. Since January 1st of last year, there have been, to present date, there have already been 10 elections around the state. That's twice as many than what were held in 12 and 13 individually. Add a bunch of sessions that were high on drama and small on results, a governor who had presidential ambitions, and a sometimes spiteful, nasty U.S. Senate race last year that transitioned right into a governor's race. And I think folks are just trying to take a deep breath, but they're not going to be able to for a while.
They're not, because we have a Senate race next year, so we're going to have 3 elections in a row, and David Vitter seats up whether he's running or not. It's going to be a big race, and people are already positioning themselves for that, so it's really nonstop.
But 2017, we can go fishing, yes.
I was New Orleans mayor.
Add to the early voting numbers, Orleans Parish is down by almost half.
Wow.
So,
right. And there are no big local elections, unlike, this is the year when you have all the parishes, for the most part, elect their local officials. New Orleans doesn't, so that's probably contributing to it also.
Yeah, the gubernatorial calendar favors the parishes that have parish elections, whereas New Orleans has their elections at a different time. It could also be that, some people have speculated that people look back in this period and see a change in in attitudes among black voters, because the main causes in there, like back in the 50s and 60s, the cause was to get black elected officials. And now just about every city in Louisiana, except New Orleans, has a black mayor, and you have black council members, there's a black president. And so you've lost some of that.
And you
cause.
also have a Democrat in the gubernatorial race that doesn't have strong ties to urban black Democrats. You know, he's white, he's from Amite, he's kind of running as this traditional kind of, you know, conservative Democrat that has in the past done very well statewide, but has not been necessarily a candidate that, you know, real hardcore Democrats are going to be excited about.
Jeremy, let me ask you, a low turnout impacts or benefits or doesn't whom, would you say?
I think it benefits David Vitter by far. You know, he's the one who has the money to actually create a model for turnout. Everyone has their models, everyone has their ID programs, but David Vitter is the one who's able to probably sink $1 million, if not more, into it. So he's going to get his vote out. He knows where his voters are.
And he's the name people know.
Right, and the areas that are dropping, the Orleans Parish, the women, African American voters, those are not the voters that David Vitter is going to be going after anyway.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, whoever is the governor, the next governor, is going to be facing some really important issues for the state. The budget, higher education, health care. And Julia, we're going to have you solve them all for him right now. Tell us, what will the next governor be facing?
So I think the next governor is going to have a big budget problem on their hands, both immediately, like in January, we're going to have a mid-year budget problem, which affects stuff that's going on right now. The fiscal year runs from July to July, so we'll be about halfway through. We know we're probably, I would say conservatively, like well over $100 million in the hole for the current year, and that's very conservative. And then, of course, they're going to have problems next year, fixing the budget for next year. None of the solutions are easy. All of our candidates are talking about rolling back tax credits and rebates. All of those programs have constituencies, and all of them have lobbying efforts they're going to fight to keep what's theirs. On top of that, some of the bigger fixes would require constitutional changes, which not only requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature, but also the public to be like, yeah, I want this, which we don't know they're willing to do yet.
And that's all a process that takes time, too.
Right.
It doesn't happen overnight.
Right. Meanwhile, we've got higher ed kind of sitting out there wondering what's happening and not being able to plan very much for their future because they don't know what their funding situation is going to be like. And that is causing a lot of angst, even at the flagship campus in LSU. I talked to a lot of professors, and it is really reaching a concern standpoint among the rank and file, and it should be. And we don't have a lot of answers from candidates about what they're going to do in terms of higher ed, especially, I would say, Freudian slip. Senator Vitter is the only one that sort of has hinted that maybe he might be open to consolidating campuses and sharing space, but he won't say where, and he won't really give us an idea of what he means by that. The other candidates are saying that's not really on the table for them. And then healthcare, the big question is Medicaid expansion. Stephanie has written a lot about this. John Bell Edwards has the most straightforward approach where we know like exactly what would happen. He would accept Medicaid expansion, and it could probably be fast-tracked. The other candidates are saying they want a waiver, and we don't know what that means in terms of the timeline and what the federal government would do. Two candidates, Scott Angel and David Vitter, are saying they want a work requirement for the new people who get Medicaid expansion. That's been rejected when some other states have proposed it. So we're not sure how that would work either. So there are a lot of questions about that.
So whoever it is in January is going to have some really hard decisions immediately facing them. I know we're looking at special sessions. Who's saying what regarding special sessions? Who's going to call it right away? Who would call two?
John Bell Edwards has said that he'll hold two within the month of February, back-to-back, one for the current fiscal year, which has a $300 million shortfall for Medicaid, $19 million needed to fulfill TOPS, $135 million may be cut for oil prices. We got some serious problems in the current fiscal year. And then another one for broad-based revenue and budget problems. Scott Angel is talking about having two as well, maybe starting in late January. Jay Darden said at least one, but probably two for the same reasons. One for the current fiscal year, one for broad-based issues. But David Vitter is the only one who hasn't said that we'll need more than one. He said, so we'll probably just get one out of David Vitter. And his team is already working on legislation, lawmakers tell me.
So we are looking at a very busy year right at the start, 2016.
Yeah, and we have a presidential primary in there, and we have our own governor running in presidential primaries elsewhere.
Right.
So there'll be a lot going on.
A lot going on, a lot to discuss here in the future months to come, too. Right now, though, tomorrow is Election Day, and people are going to be pulling their lever for one of the gubernatorial candidates. Let's talk about the gubernatorial candidates. How is it looking right now?
Well, the debates are over, thank goodness, right? I mean, there are 4 and 7 days. There's only so many ways you can ask, where is David Vitter? But it's, the tracking polls have shown more or less the same trend of John Bel Edwards moving into the 30s. How high is going to be an interesting question. And David Vitter kind of clinging to his bottom, rock bottom of 2021, although he'll probably end up performing a little bit better. The question now is, can Scott Angel or Jay Darden somehow capture lightning in a bottle, get undecided voters to turn out to vote for them for an October surprise? And if they do, it would certainly be that. It would be a surprise, just based on the polling trends.
So what are we seeing those candidates, Angel and Darden, do to try to move it in their direction?
Well, I think that they're both, first and foremost, trying to rally their base, which is Baton Rouge for Jay Darden and Acadiana for Scott Angel, the Boudin candidate. They're trying to get those bases out. They're trying to get them ready, trying to get them to show up. Scott Angel's got a leg up with a very hot mayor's race and a very hot sheriff's race in Lafayette Parish.
Although Jay Darden got the endorsement from the newspaper there, interestingly.
He did from the Gannett-owned advertiser.
Yeah.
So they're both trying to do that, and they're just trying to make sure that their get out the vote operations are in place.
And there's another thing that's happening kind of quietly, and it's unclear how successful, but they're trying it. In Orleans, as we were saying, where you have a lot of Democratic votes, you have a lot of people who would maybe like a Democrat but really don't want David Vitter. So they both have operations. They have some operatives on the ground trying to kind of steer some Democrats toward Darden or Angel, as opposed to Vitter.
Angel is bought into with was it Politicamp?
Yeah,
with
Vincent Sylvain, who's a veteran operative, works closely with the mayor.
with all the candidates from south of Baton Rouge, where's the North going to go?
North Louisiana in the crosstabs has always been Vitter country.
Yeah.
All 3 candidates have spent significant resources and time up there to try to make a dent in that. But I think it's going to be one of those times we're just going to have to wait and see how that breaks out. I mean, if you look at it collectively, it is David Vitter country, but there are small areas where one of the other 3 candidates are starting to make some headway, or started to make some headway in this final leg of the primary. But David Vitter does pretty well up there.
Vitter reminds me about what they used to say about Errol Long, that no one admitted to voting for him, but he always won by a big vote. Okay, and it seems like Vitter's support is it's wide but not deep. So people who vote for him, they vote for him for some reason, but they don't really.
Well, he's not loved. He's not loved by other politicians. He's not really loved by voters. It's been a strange campaign because it's really been kind of defensive, given that he's really been the front runner all along. And I think maybe his voters feel that way too. Between the prostitution, everything. It's just the fact that he's not. People aren't really enthusiastic about him, but they think he's effective. I think that's been kind of the trend throughout his career.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, he has an enthusiastic base, but it's more of a dedicated base, I guess. They're gonna. These are folks you can light on fire, and they're gonna find their way to the polls.
So who do you think we're going to see in the runoff for governor?
Stephanie makes predictions.
I do. Well, I would. It does look like Vitter and John Bel Edwards. And then the interesting thing is there have been so many polls that have showed that they would be neck and neck in a runoff. But on the other hand, this state has voted so consistently for Republicans that it's really hard to believe that's accurate.
It's a whole different beast in the runoff. You got 2 candidates.
John Bel hasn't really been subjected to the scrutiny that the other 3 have. No one's spending money on him.
Or the criticism, the ad campaign against him, except by the Republican Governors Association.
They dropped $1 million on his head and really haven't made that huge of a dent in his share of white registered Democrats or anywhere else.
Okay, well, let's talk about the lieutenant governor's race. Stephanie, you start off that.
This is one of those races that makes people's eyes glaze over because lieutenant governor is in charge of tourism and culture, and isn't going to be dealing with healthcare and higher ed, and except using the bully pulpit perhaps. But it's an important job, obviously, in one sense, because it's a stepping stone to Kathleen Blanco was lieutenant governor, became governor. Mitch Landrieu became mayor. Jay Darden would like to become governor, although we don't know that's going to happen. And this is an important area of state government. It's an important part of the economy. The candidates, Kip Holden, the mayor of Baton Rouge, Democrat, everyone's pretty much conceding him a runoff spot. He's going up against 3 Republicans, 2 local parish presidents, John Young from Jefferson Parish, Billy Nungesser, formerly of Plaquemines, and also Elbert Guillory, who's a state senator. It's really between Nungesser and Young, and I think the betting money is pretty much on Young, probably. But we'll
To get in the runoff?
To get in the runoff.
It's looking pretty tight between them. They both went
Really
mega negative at that moment.
So it's gotten
bottom
very
the same
personal.
day,
It's not about issues. It's, we always have people running for lieutenant governor who say, I'll do tourism, but I'm going to do all these other things. And then you have the governor say, well, that's my job. Mm-hmm. So, there's been some of that, and there has been in the past. But this one has really been a lot of personal attacks between Nungesser and Young.
Some of the polls have been bouncing back and forth, but they're almost always within the margin of error of each other. I mean, it's going to...
Well, I'll go back to my question about North Louisiana. Plaquemines Parish, where Nungesser is from, is as far away from North Louisiana as you can get. Is that going to be a factor? Or?
Again, if you look in the crosstabs for North Louisiana collectively, they end up being pretty close together.
Right.
Now individually, for some regions, one's leading the other, but I still think Acadiana is the swing region there, where Billy Nungesser now lives, where his campaign headquarters is, and his first commercial had Brobridge in it.
Nungesser and actually Scott Angel have something a little bit in common in that they kind of have this everyman quality, and that's really the way they're campaigning against someone who is maybe more urban, a little slicker. And I think they've been trying to use that to develop some affinity in North Louisiana, even though they're from South Louisiana.
I also think Nungesser tried to rectify some problems he had last time when he said that none of the BP money should be spent anywhere but coastal parishes. He sort of admitted that didn't go over well in certain parts of the state, and so I do think he's worked a little bit with people in North Louisiana to try to get them more on board with his campaign.
But generally, the opinion is we're going to be facing a runoff on this one.
Sure. One of the Republicans against Holden.
Okay, let's move on to Attorney General. Jeremy, you kick that one off.
Well, Buddy Caldwell, for all the problems he's had over the last term, getting sideways with business, sideways with chemical, sideways with the legislature, sideways with Bobby Jindal. He's holding his own, although I would say that his numbers don't look like an incumbent's numbers. This is an office that Louisiana is used to seeing turnover in. They're used to, with Charlie Fody, they kind of kicked him out of that office, and so there's a precedent. But former Congressman Jeff Landry has been able to raise some money to get some key endorsements from the business lobby, which really came late in the primary, very late in the primary. I'm expecting a runoff definitely in that contest.
A lot of Republican groups too, even though Caldwell, former Democrat, became a Republican in order to fend off a challenge last time.
And the Republican Party ended up endorsing Jeff Landry. Yeah. Now they're not going to be involved in any of the ground game this go around, but just like governor, this is going to be a completely different race in the runoff.
So how are the candidates saying that they differ from each other? What would be different?
Well, Buddy Caldwell is saying that Jeff Landry has never prosecuted a case and he would never even hire him to work on his staff. Meanwhile, Jeff Landry is saying that Buddy Caldwell has overseen the creation of a buddy system where all his kind of friend attorney firms are getting contracts through the AG's office. Then you have a slate of Democrats. You have Ike Jackson, a former attorney with natural resources, who seems to actually be polling a little bit better than Jerry Broussard Baloney, who is the official candidate of the Democratic Party.
But we got Charlie Fody defeated last time. I think most time voters don't spend a lot of time thinking about the Attorney General, and so they're kind of content to go along with the incumbent. But there was an extraordinary thing with Charlie Fody, was because of his prosecution in those Katrina cases.
So you had an issue there that people could relate to. With Caldwell, you don't have that. You have this, really the special interest.
It was a very, very emotional issue, which had hardly anything to do with the Attorney General, but it was a very emotional issue. So even people in New Orleans, which would have been his base, was sort of turned away by that.
Yeah, well, I think once you see Buddy Caldwell's Elvis impression on stage, it's hard to try to imagine life without it.
Okay, but we see a runoff in the future for that one too,
absolutely.
do you? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's move over now. Jefferson Parish. Jefferson Parish is going to be electing a new president.
We have a new parish president and some council seats. And again, it's a situation where the parishes have their elections at the same time as the state does, and so that affects the politics, because some people who might have wanted to run for a state office have to not run for it or have to give up their office to be able to run for the state office. And so, but anyway, let's look at the. What do we have in the parish president's race? I think all consensus is that it's between Elton Lagasse, who's been on the council, who's been on the school board, who's been very much a part of Jefferson Parish, who's the administrator for the school board, and Mike Yenny, who's the mayor of Kenner. The Yenny name is very, very popular in Jefferson Parish, and it really comes down, I think, to the two of those. I think most people would say that Mike Yenny is the favorite, but Elton Lagasse has a lot of old loyalties and alliances, and so it's going to come down to those two. A chance, though, that it could be a primary win, because I don't think anybody sees yet the other three drawing enough votes to throw it into a runoff. Then there are several council races, but two that we want to look at is we got the district council race, and we have the. This is the race between Mike. This is the Metairie area district council seat, and this is between Mike Thomas and Jennifer Van Vranken. Van Vranken has had like a tremendous sign campaign for the longest time. Mike Thomas announced earlier he was going to the campaign, and they wasn't sure whether Van Vranken would or not. But once she did, she came in strong. She's a former executive assistant for John Young. And it's put together a campaign. Mike Thomas has had several capacities in Jefferson Parish, including in the district attorney's office. And at one point, he was an interim councilman when there was a vacancy there. And so he's actually, in a sense, a former councilman. He doesn't have the signs that Van Vranken does, but he sure has the support, including Newell Norman, who's the sheriff. Newell Norman personally is a powerful vote getter. If Newell Norman ever gets below 90% in an election, he fire his campaign manager. And so can he deliver votes? And if he can, then that's a strong push for Thomas.
Okay, so you're saying that it's possible maybe a primary win in the president's race?
Well, I think so, yeah, because I don't think the other three candidates can dive off, take away enough votes, and so it could be in the primary, yeah.
Okay, we'll be looking for that. Jefferson Parish voters, go to the polls tomorrow. Cast your vote. Okay. Now, also on the ballot for everybody across the state.
Yes.
Amendments. There are 4 amendments.
4 constitutional amendments.
People really don't pay
This
very
is the other
close
thing that
attention
makes
to the
people's
amendments. So we're going
eyes
to
glaze
try to make them a little bit more clear to
Okay.
you. Stephanie's going to explain them right now.
I'm going to try. They are all real insider in terms of how state government works, so it's hard to get people very interested. But there are only 4. Last year there were 14, so this is better than that. We've amended the Constitution 181 times. This is something that comes up every now and then. Should we keep doing it this way? But this is what we're doing.
And that's since 1973.
Yes.
Okay, so.
That's true, yes.
And then what, 181 times?
181, yes.
All right.
So that's just what's passed. So we have 4 questions. The first one's probably the most important. And it basically would do a couple things. One would be to fix some problems with what's known as the rainy day fund, the budget stabilization fund. That's kind of a technical thing, but probably important. But the big thing it would do would be create a separate piece of that fund that would go towards transportation and infrastructure. And of course, we have horrible problems with that in funding repairing bridges and roads and things.
Roads, yeah.
So what it would do, this is all money that comes from oil and gas revenue, so probably it wouldn't really kick in for a while until the prices go up.
Yeah.
But right now, excess money is funneled into this fund. It's capped. Right now it's capped at $811 million. There's about $500 million in there. And this is something that one of the things it does is it allows the bond agencies it gives them some comfort that if we ever have a big shortfall, we can fill it, or if we ever have a big windfall, the state will kind of put some aside and not spend it all and then create obligations it can't meet in a shortfall. So that's one of the important things about it. The proposal is to basically create a separate piece of that fund so that once it hits $500 million, the rest of it goes into a fund for transportation. One of the arguments for that is that we need the money for transportation.
We already
raise
have
taxes.
a transportation fund, though,
It's
don't
completely
we?
separate from that, and that is funded by gasoline taxes mostly, and it's been rated a number of times. This couldn't be rated. But on the other hand, it would, give the legislature less flexibility. If there is ever a windfall, do they want to spend it on that or the coast or something else? But that's what it would do, basically. So it's a way of trying to, in good years, trying to find some money for infrastructure.
Okay, doke. Let's move on to amendment number 2 now.
Number 2 is also involves infrastructure. This would, there's something, the state last year created a state infrastructure bank, which would create some money that basically localities could borrow at low interest rates to do road projects. The legislature can fund it. This would allow the treasurer to put some money into it too, with money that he's responsible for, that he's supposed to invest. This is one of the places he could invest it.
Okay, doke. Let's move on to the next one. then.
Okay, number
4
3 is real insider. This is, if you've heard the phrase fiscal session versus general session, every other year the legislature is supposed to focus for the most part on tax matters. As we found out this past year, what does a tax mean? Is it a rebate? Is it, it really kind of cleans up the language a little bit to clarify what the legislature can do which year.
Okay.
So-
and legislators say they need this.
They do,
Okay,
because there's been
to
a lot
make
of
it more clear.
confusion of what is allowed under the rules.
Yes. Okay, doke. And let's take a look at number 4 now.
Number 4 is the state basically prohibits taxation of property owned by local or state government. The question is, does that mean, what if there's property in Louisiana owned by another state, which is something that happened, or another city? Memphis actually
Right.
owns some land, and there was a court case in North Louisiana where the judge ruled that Memphis did not have to pay taxes on some land it owned, some property it owned in Louisiana. This would change that and clarify that it only applies to local and state.
So the state would be able to tax these entities.
Correct.
Other states, though, and also other
Correct.
local governments from other states, but not
Yes,
within the state.
and international.
think
And
it's
international as well. Okay.
Local governments are mostly affected. At least I think in the case in North
Right.
Louisiana.
Right, it's West
Yeah.
Carroll Parish.
Okay, we have had political discussion. We're going to now wrap up this whole political discussion with who do you think is the rising political star in the state of Louisiana or locally or whatever? Errol, we'll start with you.
Well, first, let me go on record as saying that I think Memphis should definitely be paying taxes to Louisiana.
Louisiana.
Also, Houston and Dallas, okay? Even if they don't own anything here, just for the principle of it. The Jefferson Parish has obviously become the power base in Louisiana because of the media market and the size of the population. It's so Republican. And so really anybody kind of out of Jefferson Parish, I think somebody like Mike Guinea's, assuming he wins, is parish president, somebody you want to keep an eye on.
Okay, Jeremy?
I'll make a prediction for the 2023 governor's race. I think Congressman Garrett Graves of Baton Rouge will be in that race, and he'll come out as the campaign fundraising leader in the beginning.
We will look for
Over
that.
who?
Julia?
I think whoever wins
Mitch Landrieu?
Lieutenant Governor, Mitch Landrieu. I was gonna say.
Okay, Julia.
I actually am going to pick someone who's a Democrat. I think Walt Leger is probably a rising star. I think he'd be a rising star statewide if the Democrats weren't in a difficult position. So I think you should look for.
Look to Walter. Stephanie.
He was on my list too. I'm going to say Kenneth Polite, the U.S. attorney here in New Orleans, who hasn't run for office before, but a lot of people would really like him to. He's got a
Okay.
good story, good media presence.
Great
Yeah.
election eve discussion. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Go vote tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll see you next week from Informed Sources. Good evening.
Just moving on.